I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. It looks like a presidential rematch is underway, whether voters like it or not. Welcome to Perino on Politics, where we give you everything you need to know from a 30,000-foot view of this week in politics. Joining me today is my friend, founder of the bipartisan government relations firm Mehlman Consulting, and now popular Substacker. More on that in a moment. It is Bruce Mehlman. Hi, Bruce.
Dana, great to be with you.
We've been friends for a long time, and what I love about our friendship is, one, we can talk dogs if we want to. We can talk husbands, wives, and children, but we can also talk politics, and I love your thinking. And what I wanted to start with today was not talking necessarily about what happened on Saturday night at the rally and Biden's plans for a trip to the border this week, that we could talk about this. I wanted to start by asking you to give me your thoughts on this continued political realignment that we are living through, but it feels like it's almost accelerated. You know, it's on warp speed. It's going so fast, where you have college-educated voters who, when you and I worked in the Bush administration, George W. Bush usually won all the college-educated voters, and now the Democrats usually win all of them. And President Biden right now is looking at some pretty heavy losses with Hispanics and blacks. I wanted to get your take on that just from a 30,000-foot level.
It's not your father's Republican Party, and it's not your mother's Democratic Party. You're 1,000% right. It feels like there is a realignment. At the operational level, it is indeed. Republicans seem to be increasingly a multi-ethnic blue-collar party. And recent books by our pal Patrick Ruffini, as well as longtime Democratic scholar Rui Teixeira, both make the point that the Democrats, by shifting from economic populism to cultural progressivism, run the risk of losing a lot of voters of color who aren't quote unquote woke. At the same time, the GOP has kind of gone from country club to country. It used to be the insider party. It's now the outsider party. They would have called themselves conservative in a way that would have made sense to people for whom words matter. I think they're a lot more revolutionary than they are conservative now. So those are the tactical dynamics. I think there are broader reasons why, though.
Yes, and I wondered if you could maybe take a step back, if you wouldn't mind, and talk about another political realignment that happened maybe before you and I were really too involved in any of this, but we were living through it. We were just children. But
so it's not our fault.
It's not our fault. But when Reagan came on the scene, and there were a lot of people who considered themselves Reagan Democrats, was that another time when we saw a political realignment like this that really turned things upside down in politics?
Well, sure. Reagan very much reinvigorated a Republican Party that had been, at a minimum, dispirited as a result of Nixon's departure and Watergate, but also saw an opportunity as Democrats in the Watergate and Carter era arguably kind of went in the wrong direction in certain areas to reclaim a majority. What I think this period, certainly that period, you know me, I'm a history nerd. I go back to like the Gilded Age and the Progressive era. We find realignments happening every 60, 80 years. And they happen when people observe that the policies and the parties and the institutions that govern our lives no longer match the realities that we're living through. So if you think about the tumultuous 60s and 70s, it was time to reimagine how the United States would deal with both the economy and deal with the Soviet Union, and deal with bringing people together, as opposed to whether it's the Vietnam War or some of the cultural revolutions that people found were really divisive. The same thing was true in the Gilded Age. And I think right now we're living through a moment when, for all of the good intentions that you and I and many had in the conservative Bush era, we were very much free traders. Well, it turns out it's more complicated than just free trade good, not free trade bad. And we were very much, peace through strength. But the Iraq and Afghanistan wars were not unconditional victories that ended in the right way. Or if only we just stayed in there forever, they'd have been there. I think rethinking is necessary, and that leads to realignments.
Do you think that Trump, when he says at his rally on Saturday, I am going to put 100% tariff on everything that comes in. And he was talking about automobiles. And there's great cheers. Tariffs for me, like in my sensibility, I'm like, wait, what are we doing? It's going to make something more expensive for somebody else in this equation. But I mean, I'm on the fringe now, I think, of that thinking, I guess, of where the overall party is. And President Trump has incredible political instincts, and he can zero in on that. And I just wonder if Biden, to your point about the liberal patriot folks, and I'm going to have Rui Teixeira on the podcast soon, he's trying to tell the Biden team, like, you guys are losing all of these people. And I wonder if Trump and Biden can capture these moments to have some sort of foothold with this new political realignment.
Yeah, so I guess I'd start with a Trump rally cheering for Trump's statement is not my idea of a representative poll of the American pulse. They cheer lots of things that most people wouldn't necessarily embrace. But on trade, I think you're right. And some of the challenge was the Milton Friedman free trade orthodoxy made sense for a lot of the post-Cold War, but particularly China and how some of these state-owned enterprises get unfair subsidization and they can lose money, but they grab and gain market share. It explains why we invented solar panels, but now it's dominated by China. They're dominating EVs. And for a lot of folks, even people who might want to be free traders, there's a recognition that if you're a free trader and the other side has a government entity massively subsidizing and sponsoring with the goal of expanding market share, that is not a fair fight. And that leads to things like the loss of U.S. industry, creating vulnerabilities, whether it's your semiconductor supply chain too far broad or the gutting out of your industrial manufacturing capability, which at the end of the day is the most important element if you ever have to go to war with anybody. We're seeing that as there are shortages of munitions and other things we're trying to make just by giving to Ukraine, let alone if we supported Israel more, let alone if we needed them in the Pacific theater. So, Trump was right on many big ideas in the minds of a lot of folks. That he switched from a policy under Clinton and W. and Obama of engagement with China to confrontation. Biden maintained that policy.
Okay, Trump, so this is kind of a good place to transition because you understand technology, you understand the Commerce Department, you understand international affairs, you understand politics, and TikTok is a great example of how all of those issues can come together for this really thorny issue. We are talking on Monday, March 18th. Last week, the House had an incredible bipartisan result when it had its vote. The Senate, not sure if it's going to pick it up. A few buyers are saying, hey, we'll buy the ByteDance part of TikTok and try to save this app for everybody. How do you think that's going to go down, and what does it mean for either international policy or even the politics of it all?
Yeah, there are two questions I feel like that get overconflated. Question one is, can the Communist Party of China be trusted? And the answer is no. Nobody trusts them, nor should they, nor does the Communist Party of China trust the United States government, nor should they trust us. That's not the nation versus nation thing. In the case of TikTok, the question is, can technology available to Americans be secured or not be secured? You and I use iPhones. They're manufactured in China, but we trust that Apple can secure the technology. In the case of that app, the question is, they're spending more than $1 billion a year through something they call Project Texas. But can Oracle secure Americans' data? Can they make sure there is adequate and appropriate oversight of the algorithm to resist risk of propaganda? If they can secure it, then competition for Facebook is good. If it turns out it's not securable, well, we don't want things like Huawei routers, or for that matter, wireless routers in people's homes like TP-Link. There is no reason to believe they can be secured. The real debate on TikTok should come down to either it can be secured or it can't, as opposed to the area where nobody disagrees, which is, should you trust the Communist Party of China? You should not. I don't know what the Senate is necessarily going to do. There was a huge vote in the House. You're right. There was an even bigger vote in the House on a tax reform bill that was a deal between the Republican chairman of the Tax Writing Committee in the House and the Senate Tax Writing Committee in the Senate, the Democrat, that had 357 votes. So sometimes the Senate is slower than you might think.
You have a Substack, which if folks don't know, it's a app you can go on and you can then subscribe to so many great newsletters and other types of things, podcasts, things like that. And yours is called 6 Chart Sunday. I highly recommend everybody sign up for it. You showed in your, this last week's, the smallest House majority since 1954. This is the House Republicans now with their House majority, and that competitive U.S. House districts are disappearing. And I thought that was a pretty interesting to have both of those charts in 6 Chart Sunday. How do you think about that, especially given the work that you do?
Well, so first, just technically, anybody who wants to go find me, it's free to sign up for, but the name of the Substack's called Age of Disruption. The feature you're describing, Dina, is the weekly 6 a.m. in your inbox, 6 Chart Sunday.
Yes.
Mostly because once you're on Substack, I found that the quarterly deep dives that I do were not frequent enough. And so I needed something that
we
was
are
more
hungry
regular.
for more content. This is true.
Well, my friends like you, right? Everybody who appreciates data nerds. Don't sign up for this if you don't like data about politics and economics and geopolitics, because you'll hate it and you'll quit pretty quickly. Look, I tend to believe that one of the things, and this isn't always popular with the mainstream parties, but one of the things that we're going to need going forward is political reforms of the political system. The political system and the things around it were created in the pre-internet era. Think about the internet. The internet has massively blown up media and how media works. It's blown up retail. It's blown up healthcare. Like everything we did has been disrupted. Of course, politics has been disrupted too. So how we run primary elections, how we draw primary districts, they are optimized for hyper-partisanship. So 90% plus of House districts are either going to be the most extreme Republican or the most extreme Democrat, because all that matters in those partisan districts is the primary. If by contrast, you reformed how you ran primaries, as many folks are proposing, as happened in Alaska, is under debate in places like Nebraska, you're much more likely to create an opportunity for a more moderate centrist candidate who might appeal to 60 or 65 or 70% of the voters, but who doesn't have a lane in the partisan Republican primary or the partisan Democratic primary to win. And that, I think, would be majorly transformational for how Washington works and how people feel about politics. They don't feel good right now.
Yeah. My last question for you in this block goes back to 6 Chart Sunday. And it was the first chart you started with, which was U.S. presidential rematches. And one of the things you showed was that the data shows that older candidates won 4 of 6 of the elections, challengers won 4 of 6, and taller men won 5 of 6. What does that data prove?
Proves I shouldn't run for president, Dana. That's one thing. It proves that causation is not, or correlation is not causation. I mean, I found it interesting and kind of fun, but they're really old examples. There's no Eisenhower in this race. Hell, there's been no Eisenhower at the top of a ticket since Eisenhower, or maybe since Reagan. You could debate, although HW was a war hero too. But it was, as much as anything, just kind of fun. I mean, being me, I went looking for, was there anything that you ultimately always see and always don't see that might be at least giving us a chance to smile in what is otherwise the most depressing rematch and worst sequel since Caddyshack 2. It was fun to take a look at that, but my conclusion is no, nobody should bet based upon those weird data points.
All right. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. And we're back with Perino on politics. There is another element in this 2024 election that perhaps is, I don't know whether it's gaining more steam or just needs a little bit more examination, and that is the possibility of a third party. I think there are some people out there who very much want a third party. My gut instinct is third parties sound good, but never really come to fruition. But RFK Jr. Making a little bit of a run here. And also, I heard last week that some Democrats, they might be worried about RFK Jr., but they also are concerned about Cornel West. And if you ask the Hillary Clinton campaign of 2016 what they think about Jill Stein,
not good.
They do not have good words for her, even though she got just a few thousand votes, but it was enough in a couple of states to make the difference in that election. So how similar or different from previous elections is the third party option here? And of course, I didn't mention no labels, which continues to flirt with this idea that there's going to be a serious no labels ticket, and I just don't see it coming to fruition, but maybe it will.
Yeah, well, as you know, I've attempted to recruit as a third-party option Admiral McRaven and Dana Perino as my dream ticket. You guys would be great. I'd go out and campaign for you, but since that doesn't seem like it's happening.
I'd campaign for Admiral McRaven too, but no. And he wrote a great book too, Make Your Bed. Everybody should get that for your graduates. Yeah,
he has a more recent book that's worth about leadership lessons. It's worth your having him on. He's so good at this stuff.
Yeah, we love having him.
First, the system, as we both know, is by design rigged against third parties. First, it's really hard to get ballot access. There is some irony that people who are hair on fire about the importance of democracy and the importance of making sure everybody gets a choice really doesn't want them to have more than two choices. But it's really hard to get ballot access, number one. Number two, third parties typically lack organization in terms of volunteers, in terms of money, so it's harder for people to get going. Third, think about the way the system is structured. First, there aren't proportional representation. It's winner take all. So if half the states are really red and half the states are really blue, you could imagine a third party getting 40% of the popular vote and a Republican only getting 30% and the Democrat only getting 30%, but the Democrat and the Republican win by big numbers, the red and blue states respectively, and then they get crushed by big numbers in the states that aren't leaning their way. The third party getting 40% of the votes would have 0 votes in the Electoral College. Even if you got some Electoral College votes, of course, you need 270, or else the Constitution sends it to the House, where third parties have 0 House seats and 0 Senate seats. And finally, there's always this negative partisanship appeal where third parties poll really well during the campaign because people are pissed that their 2 lame choices are all we have. And then it gets real when it's time to vote. And then what happens is people say, if you're generally right of center, but you don't love Trump, they say, if you vote third party and you don't vote Trump, you're going to elect Biden. And a lot of the Republicans come home. The inverse for the Democrats, a whole lot of folks who are really unhappy, just not excited about Joe Biden, ultimately are going to be told, if you don't vote for Joe Biden, you are de facto voting for Donald Trump, even if you think you're voting for Robert Kennedy Jr. And that historically has meant that while, H. Ross Perot polled at 39%, he was leading in 1992. He ended up coming in at 18.9%, although he did stop and restart his campaign. So it got a little weird in 92. As I think about the 2024, both parties have reason to be concerned. The Biden folks are more concerned, both because more of the third parties are left of center folks, and also because, Trump does lead a movement where 48% of his voters are super psyched to vote for him. Mm-hmm. Only 23% of Biden's voters are psyched to vote for him. The majority are just not eager to see Donald Trump return. Mm-hmm. And that, when you think about who's at risk to losing votes to third parties, the enthusiasm gap is important.
There was a report today from NBC News, and I can't tell who the sources are or the original. They are friends of Biden who are anonymous, but speaking, I think, with his permission, to say he is mad at his team or angry with his team, frustrated with them, frustrated he's not getting more credit for what he considers accomplishments, though I would argue many of his accomplishments are actually vulnerabilities. And also that he understands that he's in a lot of trouble with the election. I thought that was kind of that's what I took away from it. It was like, oh, he wants everyone to understand, like, he is not blind. They have spokespeople who say basically that it's just going to be a cakewalk for Joe Biden. And I just never understand that because, one, it's just not true on its face. They ignore all of the polls. I'll never forget last May, the Washington Post ABC poll was coming out and had Trump 10 points ahead. Now, obviously, that's not the case at the moment, but I'll never forget that even before the poll came out, their own pollsters and the spokespeople at Washington Post, ABC were saying, this poll's obviously an outlier and terrible. What turns out, actually, might have been the canary in the coal mine. So I thought that was interesting. Do you think that the Biden team, but maybe even Biden himself, understands that this is going to be a very tough reelection?
Yeah, I actually do think they know that. I mean, the last election at the Electoral College, fewer than 43,000 votes separated Trump from coming back. Just like with Hillary Clinton, fewer than 80,000 votes stopped her from getting elected. And I think Biden high command, including the president, understand it's a very tightly divided country, and that it's going to be nip and tuck. You know better than anybody I know how an administration spokesfolks kind of on and off the record work the press, and and the selective leaks claiming the president's mad about whatever is a way to communicate to certain elements of the electorate or to certain of the chattering class. And so I tend to not believe. I mean, these guys have been impressively non-leaky. I think if and when there are people leaking, as likely as not, it's the intentional leaks to send and communicate a message. He knows this is serious, that he has rather than him saying, love Bidenomics, if the story instead sounds like a process story about he's upset he's not getting more credit, it gives the media a chance to point out why he might get more credit. And so it's a clever, indirect way of selling your bona fides. But I think, look, it's going to be super close. They know it's going to be super close. I'm scared to death because it's a zero trust environment, but I'm scared to death that it will potentially be days or weeks after the November election day before we have a definitive resolution.
That's a good thing to be worried about. Now I'm worried.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I should be worried about that. All right, we'll be right back with more Perino on Politics next. And welcome back to Perino on Politics. Bruce, this is our last segment, and this is where I like to ask my smart friends, what am I missing? What are you paying attention to that I should have on my radar, in addition to being that concerned about maybe not having a definitive result on election night?
Well, you don't miss much, Dana. If anything, arguably the nature of all the great content you put out, by definition, is very real time and it's kind of focused on now, as opposed to having the ability to go, let's look at 6 or 9 months from now. Since I am not a media personality, I can spend a little more time, and we work with a lot of business leaders and community leaders. So I'm thinking about Q4, Q1 in 2025.
Okay.
Q4, there's campaigns and voting. We're all focused on misinformation, disinformation, although October surprises are at high risk. And having an election where, and I know, most election volunteers are retirees who love their country, who genuinely want the system to work well in their little towns. I pray those folks continue to do the good job that they've done and they don't get intimidated out of it. But I think for folks thinking that it's going to be hectic in 2025, it's coming sooner than that. After the election, of course, you then have counting and certification. I worry about protest and violence. Objectors, whoever loses, the other side are going to have some number of congressmen and senators who are going to suggest why they don't think it was legitimate. If, God forbid, there's any violence anywhere, like on election day. You saw, and I saw the last season of Succession. God forbid, life could imitate art. We might need Supreme Court rulings again. But then you go to 2025 when the debt ceiling's back, tax reform is back, huge conversations about taxes, tariffs, and regulations. A risk of protest and violence by the folks who are unhappy into the reelected president year. There could be, I think Republicans at a very minimum are going to have 50 senators. It's very easy to see more than that, but it's kind of impossible to see fewer than that. So if it's Joe Biden, there could be a confirmation crisis. But if Biden manages to have the White House and 50, I think they're going to try to get rid of the filibuster, which last time was protected by Senators Sinema and Manchin, who are retiring. If Trump comes back, he's definitely going to want to get rid of the filibuster, which was first and foremost blocked in 2017, 2018 by Mitch McConnell. He's no longer going to be the leader. With Biden, you kind of will get 4 more years policy-wise of what you got. But with Trump, there'll be an effort to go after the career bureaucracy in government that he calls the deep state. That'll be really disruptive to the operation of government. They say they want to deport 10 plus million people, which will be about as divisive. That may be the most divisive thing that could happen. It may be consistent with what laws say, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't be divisive in decades. The effort to unwind government efforts behind DEI, ESG, and abortion will keep the kind of culture war fires burning bright.
And the border, it's so interesting that you have tomorrow, March 19th is a Tuesday, and that's where you have the Ohio primary for the Senate seat there. And for a place like Ohio, you have the number one issue is the border. And that's new and different. And I always say it didn't get there on its own. People are gathering information and deciding that even more so than the economy. That's their number one issue. And I'll give you a chance to give a final thought on that phenomenon.
Well, you're right. What's interesting to me about Ohio, it's a Trump +8 state, may get to a +10 in this presidential election year. The only Democrat who has been able to win statewide and who can win statewide is Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown's success in Ohio typically has been he remains an economic populist first and foremost. So to the point we were talking about a little earlier, and when you're going to have Rui Teixeira and maybe Patrick Ruffini on, economic populism seems to be a successful formula, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans running the play. And when Republicans say, no, the election's about the abortion, or Democrats say, no, the election should be about minimizing rules on the border, they lose. The people who seem to stick to economic populism win, culture warriors lose. And I think that's likely to be the Ohio answer, too.
It was amazing to have you on. That 25 minutes went by so fast. I have one quick thing that you have to do before we go, and that's one pop quiz question. It's multiple choice, and it doesn't matter if you don't know the answer. I never know the answer, or rarely do. Here's the question. Who is the only president to have served 2 non-consecutive terms? Oh, you might get this. A is Martin Van Buren.
Grover Cleveland, right?
Yeah, Grover. That was number C. Letter C. The third
Sorry to jump the gun, but
no, you knew it. If you know it, you know it. You got to shout it out. But if you were on Jeopardy, you would have been disqualified.
That is an underhand pitch, man. I thought you were going to throw some high inside heat.
Let me just tell you, they're usually much harder than that, because even I would have got that one right, because that's what we've been talking about. Hey, Bruce, go have a great day, and thank you for being on Perino on Politics.
Love being on with you, Dana. Thanks.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.